Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore crises that are sometimes hidden in plain view. George Esbensen is in the studio today. He worked in the fire service for Eden Prairie, Minnesota for 32 years, 16 of those as chief. He is founder of Minnesota Firefighters Initiative, MnFIRE for short. As you'll learn, their trailblazing work is a role model for departments all around the United States. George is here for the case file I call Fire Hazards. You call them the big three, George, the three biggest dangers for those who keep the rest of us out of harm's way. What are they?
Those big three are cancer, cardiac, and emotional trauma.
All right, let's get into each of these because cancer seems obvious. Cancer is cancer. Everybody gets cancer, but it's one of the big three for firefighters.
Exactly. So firefighters get cancer at much higher rates than the general population. They typically get some form of, I would call a more standard cancer, but their cancer is kind of moving at the speed of light. If it's a sort of cancer that attacks traditionally older people, let's say people in their 40s or 50s or 60s, they might get it in their 30s or 20s. Frequently it's underdiagnosed, and then it's moving very rapidly and aggressively as a result of all their exposures. Yeah.
And it seems sort of intuitive, right, why a firefighter would get cancer. I mean, the smoke inhalation, the exertion, the high heat, even things being out in all the elements, skin cancers, things like that. But it is pretty amazing. And one stat from the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Wall, 55% of those who died and are named on that wall died from cancer.
Exactly. And that's sort of a new development that didn't used to be tracked, I would say, or considered line of duty. But that all changed 10 or 15 years ago. And so now we're able to get some of those statistics. But the link between cancer and the fire service was previously not made. And so this is a positive development because what's predictable is preventable. And so that's kind of the genesis of MnFIRE is let's get ahead of this and start changing the culture of the fire service. All
right, we're going to explore solutions with George and prevention tips, but let's go through the other two of the big three. Cardiac.
So cardiac is also linked to these other two because of the stressors and getting ill and whatnot. But cardiac also is a result of when you get that fight or flight urge, there are hormones released and chemicals released in your bloodstream. One of them is cortisol. So for the general population, you might get that fight or flight reaction once in a blue moon. For the fire service, you're getting it all the time as part of your daily activities in the fire service.
I mean, maybe even multiple times a day.
Absolutely. And cortisol is a known artery hardener. And so firefighters are getting this dump of cortisol, which in large volume, hardens their arteries, and thus you get the early onset of cardiac disease, stroke, et cetera, et cetera.
So I think about firefighters, many of them, most of them, very fit. Mm-hmm. Is the fact that they're in very intense physical routines, their regimens to stay in shape, and then on the job they're physically working, does that counter some of these cardiac, the hardening of the arteries you're mentioning?
Well, it certainly can in some regards, but cortisol, creates this artery hardening kind of thing in large volume, and you can't really outrun that, so to speak.
You can't swim that away or bike that away.
You can't swim it away. Certainly, fitness is always a good thing in the fire service for sure, and there's a lot of varying degrees of that in the fire service as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, number three, emotional trauma.
Emotional trauma. So that's the one that I think most people are focused on in this day and age. Thankfully, there's been a big change in this country just more broadly around mental health issues. But in the fire service, it's always been there. So when you sort of think about it at its core, when you sign up to be a firefighter, you are mindfully now going to be going to other people's worst days. And it's not like you were born with some magic genes that didn't allow you to suffer along with other people's trauma. And because you're going to other people's very worst days, for some people it builds up and it can be, an issue. long term, or there could be a very acute issue, that develops to a lot of times involving little kids, other, very tragic kinds of things that can hit home for different people at different times.
Some really troubling stats, but ones that are really important for the general public to know. PTSD for firefighters is 4 times more prevalent than in the general population. And this is really hard. It's estimated that 100 firefighters die by suicide each year. And I've got to think that might even be an underestimate.
Absolutely. I think it's an underestimate, too. We know in Minnesota from a research project that was done several years ago that between 4 and 6 firefighters, active firefighters in Minnesota, every year die from suicide. That's juxtaposed against firefighters dying in more traditional ways, I'll say, falling off roofs, getting hit by a car, going through the basement floor. That's like 1 every other year. So you can see, exponentially, right? It's a 4x or 5x kind of issue. And certainly that 100 then based in the U.S. is probably underrepresented because Minnesota is the 21st largest state, and we have 4. And so
I would think it's several hundred. I mean, that's just my, armchair guesstimate. So we didn't only bring you here to talk about the big 3. It's really important that people know, these first responders, these heroes, the dangers, the daily, hourly dangers in their work. So I thank all firefighters personally. But what I really want to get into is what MnFIRE is doing. And you are a role model for the rest of the country. Give us a snapshot of some of these programs. And I wanted you on the Crisis Files so maybe other leaders out there, legislators from all around the country, can be checking. Do we have this? Should we have this? Regular people can write to their legislators, call their legislators. What are some of those things you're doing at MnFIRE?
Well, that's a great call to action, so thank you very much. MnFIRE is a one of its kind in the U.S. in terms of the full suite of solutions that we're bringing to the table. Some of them are reactionary, so if you get an illness, cancer, cardiac, or emotional trauma, you're eligible for a check for up to $20,000 to cover those things that good insurance, even the greatest insurance, doesn't cover. The hotel stays at the Mayo, child care, et cetera, et cetera. Education is a really important part of what we're doing because while we have those reactionary sort of resources, it's also changing the culture of the fire service. Many of these things are culturally driven. The fire service is dominated by men, and men, as you probably know, are some of the least self-aware creatures on the planet. And so
you said it, I did it.
Right,
George.
Exactly. And so we need to get out in front of this and change the behaviors. We've developed a network in Minnesota through the organization where we have over 1,000 trauma-informed mental health professionals scattered around the state. Our goal is that nobody has to drive more than an hour if they want an in-person visit. And from your travels around the state, that people will drive an hour to see a movie or get decent groceries in Minnesota. And so we figured,
in California, you drive an hour minimum just to get home every night.
Just to get to work. Exactly. Exactly. And so it's all built around the prevention tools, the training, the education. We have 7 training modules which lead firefighters, through the issues of cancer, cardiac, and emotional trauma, diet and exercise, the importance of sleep, the impact on themselves and their family members. So it's a whole complete suite of resources, both reactionary and in the prevention mitigation space, to ultimately bend this curve down.
George, this is just extraordinary. I applaud you and what MnFIRE is doing. And it's really important. Knowledge is power. So it sounds like, first and foremost, you're educating firefighters.
Yes.
And hopefully this episode gets seen and heard by a lot of people so that more regular people can be part of the solution and make sure our first responders, our firefighters, are getting this. I wanted a little bit of kind of basics. Let's go back to the beginning. There are all different kinds of agencies, fire departments around the country. I currently live in the Minneapolis area, in a suburb of Minneapolis. I used to live in Minneapolis for about 18 years before I moved to where I am now. And both of those departments are paid departments. My current town, Minneapolis is, and many of, you think of big cities around the United States. But there are a lot of volunteer fire departments out there. There are a lot of rural fire departments that have to pool resources. Maybe the county is covering a bunch of cities. How does that work? What should we know about that kind of layout? And how does what you're suggesting, how does that come into play and maybe could help?
Well, one of the underpinnings of MnFIRE is that nobody has to pay for anything. And so this is the majority of it is funded through the state of Minnesota on an annual grant that we get. And just to give you an idea, it took us 4 years to get this legislation passed. In Minnesota, we rank 21st in the nation in population. We invest about 19th in the nation in law enforcement, 21st or 20th in public works and parks, and 47th in the fire service.
Wow.
And in order to get it up to 40th, it would take about an extra $100 million a year of investment.
Wow.
And about another $800 million to bring it to 21st. So this was a Herculean lift to get anyone
to listen to
listen to us and to spend money in a way that they just typically have been neglecting the fire
and even
service.
just move the needle in the way you have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge, but you've moved it not as far as you want to yet.
A little dot.
Yes. Well,
and
go ahead.
so those volunteer firefighters, it's important because they don't get a lot of support from their local jurisdictions because they're not full-time employees, so they fall under the radar for common things like healthcare, employee assistance, mental health resources. They typically don't have access to that. In the full-time paid departments, a lot of times those things are paid for by the city, but they're not trauma-informed. So it's very important that when you go to see somebody for the things that you've been dealing with, I'm talking about with emotional trauma, that you don't disturb them so much because this is sort of outside the pale of the normal EAP. I'm having a hard time financially, or, my kid's being a jerk, or whatever those typical EAP things are. This is, I went to a drowning of 5 kids in a car that rolled over in a retention pond. That's a very different sort of animal.
Very different.
And it's very important that the resources that MnFIRE brings to the table, we have this network of trauma-informed professionals or statewide.
What can you, as another call to action here, how can people, they want their department to be on board something like this? What's step number one in the firefighting industry?
So I think in the firefighter industry, state by state, you need to get the volunteers, the part-time firefighters, the organized labor, and the state chiefs association for that jurisdiction all on the same page that we want to do this legislatively. And then, most legislators spend their time getting their pictures taken with firefighters in the front of the fire hall, et cetera. So it's time for them to put their money where their mouth is. In Minnesota, this is a $4 million annual appropriation out of a gajillion dollar budget. It's it's basically the Post-it note budget in those terms. It's costs then, if you just break it down per firefighter, $200 a year per firefighter in Minnesota. There's 20,000 firefighters. 93% are non-career. So there's some sort of part-time or totally volunteer firefighter, and it's $200 a head for this entire suite of services.
I think we all know firefighters are heroes, and no one's going to challenge that, but they are really unsung heroes. When you say 93% of them are not career firefighters, they're doing it purely voluntarily or as an add-on job. Yeah. That's crazy to me. And there is a silver lining in my mind, though. It seems like firefighters, when you think about first responders, have some of the best optics in that people generally really love to see firefighters coming.
That is very true, yes.
Unlike, sadly, in some cases, police officers.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sadly.
And they, police officers have gotten a bad rap, in my opinion, in some parts of the country. But I'm really glad firefighters have a very good rep and rap, and I really hope that more jurisdictions, more states can get it together. I imagine your team is open to advising other states on this.
Absolutely, and we're not trying to get in the middle of anything, so it's just purely we'll share our journey with you. We'll share the resources that we were able to utilize and how we got to this point and sort of what that looks like, but this isn't something we're trying to franchise or do anything with. It's just sharing what we've learned in this 9-year journey and in the 4-year journey to pass the legislation.
George, thank you for your service. Before we go, can you remember when you were back in the day, firefighter on the streets, and then chief, can you remember, like, maybe share one really moving, memorable, I don't know, call that you were on that you'll never forget?
Yeah, sure. So, we had one story, that I love to share where we went to a cardiac arrest, and the third time that we applied the defibrillation shock, the guy sat up and started talking to us. And so that was really a great moment for his family to see, for him. We got to visit him after he got back out of the hospital a few days later. And I think he was celebrating like a 65th birthday or something a few months later. And those are the kinds of stories that you try to focus on, when you're in the business, and the things that had the really great outcomes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Find out more about this important work at MnFIREinitiative.com. Today's case file is powered by Northwing Digital. Northwing Digital is driven by a simple mission: help businesses succeed. Guided by core values: trust through transparency and GSD. Get stuff done. Northwing specializes in SEO and paid digital ads that deliver measurable results. From Google search to paid social, strategies that help your business stand out and grow. Make your marketing dollars work harder. Visit northwingdigital.com to get started. Northwing Digital, your partner in growth. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and X at The Crisis Files. Visit thecrisisfiles.com for all 4 seasons of the show. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.